I've seen it happen more times than I'd like to admit. You spot a bargain kegerator on a clearance rack, you rush it home, and after a few weeks you're stuck with a half-filled barrel that won't keep a decent temperature and a door that jams every time you try to get a beer. The disappointment is real, especially when you're trying to turn a small home bar into a reliable spot for weekend get-togethers. That's why I wanted to take a closer look at a unit that claims to be a step above those cheap knockoffs, the Kegco 24-inch wide Reserva series panel-ready right Hinge Beverage Center. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest question most of us ask is whether this thing can actually hold a keg at the right temperature without constantly tweaking the thermostat. Kegco's digital control panel promises a range from 32 to 64 F, which covers the sweet spot for most draft beers. In practice, I set it to 38 F for a standard American lager, and after a full day the temperature stayed within a degree or two of that setting. That steadiness matters when you're serving a crowd. You don't want the first round to be icy cold and the last round lukewarm because the unit can't hold a consistent chill. The next thing people worry about is space. A 24-inch wide footprint isn't huge, but it's definitely larger than the mini-fridge-size kegerators you see in garage sales. The real trick with the Reserva series is that it's built to be panel-ready. That means the door can be swapped out for a custom panel that matches the surrounding cabinetry. If you've already invested in a bar that looks like a polished wood finish, you can blend the unit right in instead of having a glaring metal door sticking out. I tried it both ways, with the stock stainless door and with a painted panel, and the difference in how the whole setup feels in a room is huge. It goes from looking like a piece of equipment to becoming part of the decor. One of the practical strengths that often gets overlooked on paper is the shelving system. Kegco uses metal ball-bearing shelves that slide out fully. Most kegerators have shelves that stop short, forcing you to reach around the keg to get a bottle or a snack. Here, the shelves glide out completely, so you can place a snack tray, a set of glasses, or even a small ice bucket without having to wrestle the whole unit. I actually used the bottom shelf to store a few extra cans of soda for a family barbecue, and the full extension meant I never had to tip the keg or strain my back to get them. Lighting is another area where the Reserva tries to stand out. The unit includes a customizable LED strip with 9 color options and 5 brightness levels. It sounds like a gimmick until you see it in a dimly lit patio. I set it to a soft amber for a relaxed vibe, then switched to a cool blue for a game night feel. The fact that you can adjust both hue and intensity without adding a separate light fixture is a small but genuine convenience. It doesn't affect temperature, but it does add a touch of personality that cheap alternatives simply don't bother with. Now, let's talk about the downsides that matter after you've brought it home. The first is the size and weight. Because it's designed for both built-in and freestanding use, the chassis is fairly robust, which translates to a heavier unit. Moving it up a flight of stairs or into a tight kitchen nook can be a workout, especially if you're doing it alone. The manual recommends 2 people for installation, and that's not just a safety tip, it's a realistic expectation. If you're looking for a lightweight, portable solution that you can pop into a dorm room, this isn't it. Second, the digital control panel is sleek but a bit too minimal for users who like tactile feedback. The buttons are touch-sensitive and sit flush with the surface, which looks clean, but you can't feel them when you're in a dimly lit room and trying to adjust the temperature without looking. I found myself turning on the kitchen light just to make sure I wasn't setting it to 45 F instead of 38 F. For most people this isn't a deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of if you value quick, blind adjustments. The temperature range itself, while technically 32-64 F, is limited by the compressor's ability to stay at the lower end in warmer ambient conditions. I tested it in a garage that was sitting around 80 F, and after a few hours the unit hovered at about 39 F rather than the 32 F I set. If you live in a hot climate and plan to keep the kegerator in an unconditioned space, you might need to think about extra insulation or a cooler placement. That's not a flaw with the product per se, it's just physics, but it's a practical consideration that cheap units also